And can you put the slides on as well, Lauren?
Resume recording.
Okay. So good evening and thank you for coming to this webinar on meeting your groups online safely. I'm Claire Ritchie and I'm going to be presenting this evening. I've been employed part-time by Woodcraft Folk for the last 7 years doing development work in Scotland to set up new groups, support existing groups and generally promote Woodcraft Folk. I also volunteer in Scotland as a district coordinator and a pioneer group leader. And also here is Lauren, another development officer from Woodcraft Folk. Lauren, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, my name's Lauren and I work with Claire also as a development officer, and I'm based in North London. So thanks everyone for joining us.
Okay. I can see that another participant has joined, so I will mention that we are recording tonight so that this will be available on the website. And if you could mute your microphones to help us with sound quality and use the chat function to make any comments or questions, that will help us with the recording. And also, you might prefer to switch your camera off if you prefer not to be seen in the website recording that we're making. Okay. So if we could move on to the next slide, we'll talk about what we're going to cover. So you'll all be aware that Woodcraft Folk activities became restricted to online only from the middle of March last year because of coronavirus. There was some easing of restrictions in the summer and autumn of 2020, and some of us were able to run some face-to-face activity, mainly outdoors. But since the beginning of this year, 2021, we've all been entirely restricted to online activity again, and we anticipate this lasting until at least the end of this term. Back in March 2020, Debs McCann, who's our current chief executive and who many of you will know, delivered a very comprehensive webinar on online safety, which is still available on our website, and it remains very useful and relevant. However, we felt that almost a year down the line, it would be valuable to run a refresher webinar, share some of our learning from the past year, and provide an opportunity for questions and discussion on this topic. So there's a range of ways for Woodcraft Folk members to engage with the organisation and each other online, including social media posts and groups, messaging services, and live and recorded broadcasts. Tonight's webinar is focused on running live group meetings for children and young people using video conferencing platforms. It'll be focused on use of the Zoom platform, which we think most groups are using and which myself and Lauren have a lot of experience of using with Woodcraft Folk groups. But please do message in the chat and let us know about other platforms that you're using. Whichever platform you're using, we anticipate that the discussion we have tonight will still be useful and relevant. So we're going to cover setting up online meetings safely, using the features available within online meeting platforms safely, group agreements for online meetings, and identifying and addressing concerns that arise during online meetings. There'll be a space at the end of the meeting for you as participants to share your experiences and ask questions, and you can also do this during the course of the meeting using the chat function. So next slide, please, on setting up online meetings safely. So as with any Woodcraft Folk activity that we organise, at online meetings, we're responsible for the safety of the children and young people participating. We need to run our online meetings with 2 adults who are current Woodcraft Folk members with Woodcraft Folk DBS checks, or in Scotland, PVG checks. We need our adults to commit to online sessions the same way that they do to face-to-face sessions, turning up on time for the full session and able to focus on the meeting without frequent distractions from other commitments like mobile phone calls or childcare, etc. We should be confident that we can offer this level of volunteer commitment before we set up an online meeting and invite children and young people. We need consent for children and young people to take part in our online meetings. Best practice would be to provide written information and a consent form to parents or carers by email and have the consent form signed and returned by email. However, for a child or young person who's already registered with one of our groups and has previously been attending face-to-face meetings, if we have simply shared details of a meeting with a parent or carer and then their child logs in as a result, this is acceptable as consent. Children and young people should be provided with enough information about what will be happening at online meetings to allow them to decide whether they want to log in and take part, i.e. give their consent. Children and young people shouldn't have to share their personal contact details, i.e. personal email addresses or phone numbers to join an online meeting. Meeting attendance should be by invitation only, and therefore we shouldn't share login details on public Facebook pages, etc. We should advise our families, volunteers, children and young people not to share login details with others outside the group. It's great if they have friends who want to join in, but we need their parents or carers' consent first, as we would if they were attending a face-to-face Woodcraft folk session. When we set up our meetings on Zoom, we should use a meeting ID and passcode. For additional security, it's good practice to use the waiting room, where the host individually admits participants. In this case, participants will need to be advised that they need to have their Zoom name set to something the group leader will recognise. It's possible to lock the meeting once all participants have arrived and prevent anyone else joining, which provides an extra level of security, but could exclude children and young people that try and join partway through a session. If we can have the next slide, please, which is about using the functions of video conferencing safely. So cameras and microphones, everyone having their microphones and cameras on makes for a more engaging and interactive meeting. We need to make sure everyone feels safe and respected in this context. As we all know, it's difficult in a Zoom meeting if one person talks at the same time as another, and we need to agree systems for taking turns and ensuring everyone's heard. As leaders, we have the functionality to mute participants, but we need to use this respectfully and sensitively. When it comes to cameras, some children and young people don't feel comfortable on camera, and we need to respect their right to keep their camera off and still include them. We've got a mix of activities available to us, some that require cameras to be on and some that work fine with cameras off. Everyone who's involved in a meeting should be dressed appropriately and use only appropriate real or virtual backgrounds. People might need to be reminded of this because they've got used to using Zoom for very informal socialising with family and friends. Other people that are present, even in participants' households, shouldn't participate in group sessions without agreement. This shouldn't be a major issue at the moment where household visiting isn't permitted and only family members should be present in the house. Parents and carers shouldn't be required to take part in sessions with their children unless a risk assessment of the activities determines that this is necessary. So for instance, if you're running a cooking session with elephants or pioneers that requires use of the hob or the oven. If children and young people want parents and carers to join in with them, then they can take part. They need to be aware of group rules and they participate on the basis that they're being supervised by the screened adult leaders in the same way that they would be if they attended a face-to-face session with their children. So leaders shouldn't record or screenshot meetings unless it's for a clear purpose and everyone involved has given consent. Children and young people should be asked not to record or screenshot meetings. And then moving on to the chat function. The chat function in Zoom allows participants to type messages to everyone participating in the meeting and one-to-one with other participants. The Zoom account can be set to disable all chat or I think to just disable one-to-one chat. Generally, it's better if all chat can be allowed and permitted as it makes the meeting more of a social experience for children and young people. And one of our purposes is about children and young people making friends and communicating, especially at the moment. This is especially important because children and young people might feel isolated from their peers. And children and young people would have one-to-one conversations at face-to-face meetings that adult leaders wouldn't be part of. So one-to-one chat is a reasonable thing. It is important to set expectations about the conversations children and young people will have with each other while at group, i.e. that we're kind and that we don't say anything that we wouldn't want someone to say to us. It's possible to share links and images in the chat, and this can be useful to leaders so that we can take everyone to a Kahoot quiz or a game of virtual bingo, for example. We need to be really careful about children and young people sharing links or images in the chat. We should ask children and young people not to do this unless they have permission from a leader who's had the opportunity to view the image or the link in advance. In Zoom, as you'll know, we can share any screen on our computer, so we can use the whiteboard to play games or show a slideshow we've made in Google Slides, or show a website that's relevant to our session. Our children and young people can share their screens too, but it's possible to set up the meeting so that only the host can share their screen. We might decide this is safest. If we are going to allow screen sharing by children and young people, we need clear group rules around this. When a host is sharing their screen, as some people may have experienced, it's possible for all participants to annotate it, i.e. draw or write on it. Again, group rules need to be established around this. Some groups have been showing films as part of online meetings. If we're doing this, we obviously need to choose ones that are rated appropriately for the group. And it's good practice to advise families what we will be showing in advance, because although films might be age appropriate, it's best to let families determine what's appropriate for individual children and young people. And then on breakout rooms, in Zoom, it's possible to put participants into breakout rooms for small group work. And this can be really useful, and it's fine for children and young people who are comfortable with each other to go into breakout rooms without an adult present all the time. It's possible for adults to drop in and out of the breakout rooms and supervise to some extent in the same way they would with small group work in a hall. Children and young people should be advised about the use of breakout rooms in advance of them happening and have the option not to join a breakout room. And those were the key points about the functions of the video conferencing safely. So now just talking about group agreements. As with face-to-face sessions, it's important to set expectations about behaviour in online meetings with children and young people. The group agreement should cover the areas we've just been talking about, like screenshotting, recording, use of the chat function, etc. Best practice is that the group agreement should be developed with children and young people. But if it is developed by leaders, then as a minimum, we should ask children and young people to show that they accept it. So for example, read it out and ask for a thumbs up over Zoom to indicate agreement. And also children and young people should be given the opportunity to add to any group agreement that's developed by leaders. It might be useful to show a slide at the beginning of group meetings as a recap of the group agreement, because it's quite reasonably likely that some of your members might have missed it the first time you go over it if you only end up going over it once. It's good practice to agree as part of the group agreement what we'll do about participants who aren't following group rules, and possible consequences are likely to include being removed from an online meeting by a group leader at the kind of extreme end of behaviour that's not acceptable to the group. It's really important to discuss as part of the group agreement what participants should do if anything at an online meeting makes them feel uncomfortable. We should emphasise that no one should be feeling uncomfortable at a Woodcraft folk session. Now we're going to move on to identifying and raising concerns at online sessions. If we can have the next slide, please. So we've got a responsibility to safeguard children and young people that we have contact with through online sessions, just the same as we do at face-to-face sessions. So we might have concerns about the behaviour of children and young people impacting negatively on other children and young people, and we should deal with this through our group agreement as already discussed. We might have concerns about the welfare of children and young people in our groups because of how they're presenting or information that they're sharing. In this case, we need to follow our usual safeguarding procedures, which at the most extreme end, where we believe a child to be in immediate danger, can involve phoning the police, and at the other end can involve a conversation with our district safeguarding officer, recording concerns and or signposting families to support services. And finally, we might have concerns about the behaviour of other adults who are participating in our online sessions. And again, we need to follow our usual safeguarding procedures around that. We need to keep a register of children and adults that are present at all our online sessions so that we have a record in case any concerns arise. And the key thing is that we don't ignore issues and concerns that arise, and that we know where to go with them. And I'm going to, on the next slide, look at the Woodcraft folk resources that we use to help us generally with safeguarding, which are all applicable to our online sessions as well. So what I'm going to do just now is share my screen so that I can actually visit the site, because that will be easier. So hopefully you can all see there the Woodcraft Folk Safeguarding Portal, which hopefully a lot of you are already familiar with, and it's easily accessed by typing safeguarding into the search box on the Woodcraft Folk website, or by the simple address, which is just woodcraft.org.uk/safeguarding. And it has our main safeguarding policy, and it has the parts of what to do if you're concerned about a child or a young person, and what to do if you're concerned about the suitability or the behaviour of an adult. You can see those links here. And then what is particularly useful from this page in terms of online sessions is if you click this safeguarding guidance and other policies tab, my computer is just getting there, you will see that you get at the top of this list on this page, we've got the virtual group, social networking, website, mobile and email communication guidance, which is basically covers all online activities with children and young people, and probably answers most questions that you could have. There's also a document on, I think that, yeah, further down this page, you can see there's a document on using Zoom safely, which is also very useful in addition to the social networking, website, mobile and email communication guidance. And then this page also links to the risk assessment guidance page, which I'm just hopefully getting up. And there is on this page an example risk assessment, video conferencing risk assessment document. Online sessions should have a risk assessment, identifying potential risks and what steps we're taking to mitigate them, which is basically putting down on paper all the things that we've been talking through this evening. To support inclusion at local online sessions, it can be very beneficial to deliver materials to families in our groups, like craft materials and cook-along materials. The video conferencing risk assessment template that's here doesn't cover this aspect, but obviously we need to risk assess this in terms of safe delivery of materials to people and observe physical distancing and hand hygiene. And then if we can go back to Lauren's screen, we'll look at some other resources out with Woodcraft Folk that can also help us.
If you stop sharing, Claire, then
yes.
I can.
Thank you. Okay, so the 3 websites that are listed at the top of this slide all provide advice on online safety and have sections for professionals that would be useful to us as youth work volunteers. And they have sections for children and young people that would be directly useful to the children and young people in your groups. The UK Safer Internet Centre, the 3rd one down, has a helpline for professionals seeking advice, and also a hotline for reporting harmful content online. And then CEOP at the bottom of the slide is the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Command, which is a website run by the police where people can report online abuse. As well as educating ourselves on online safety for our volunteer role at Woodcraft Folk, it would be good to educate the children and young people in our groups by running programme on this topic and signposting to resources to support their safe use of the internet in all contexts. And the websites above provide us with the resources to do this. We'd be really interested to hear if any groups have tried or do try in the future to run a programme on online safety with their children and young people. And that is the main information that I thought it would be helpful to share. I hope that was useful, and this is basically an opportunity for you to ask any questions about anything in the presentation, raise any issues that weren't covered, share any good practice from your groups around internet safety. So if there is anything that anyone here wants to raise, please just unmute and feel free.
Hello.
Hiya.
I'm Susanna, by the way. I'm not really, well, I am new in Woodcraft, but I'm not all of new in Woodcraft represented in one person.
Hi, Susanna.
Yeah. I don't think I've got any questions. That was really thorough. I mean, we've been using Zoom. I think all our groups have been using Zoom for the last year. The Elfin struggle, and they have fewer Zooms, or we sometimes merge sessions. So the Pioneers and Elfins tonight, we've just had a session together between the two groups, just because it's more engaging for the Elfins, and then the parents sort of tend to come in and support them. So we have a lot more adults maybe than we would have a normal group night. But I think it's going to be really interesting moving back from online to real life. We spent a lot of time outside. We spent as long as possible outside.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
and now it's sort of, you know, treading that path of going back in. They were asking tonight, actually, when are we going to start meeting again? When are we going to come offline? And it's, you know, quite key to them, and we're not sure. I guess we're waiting for National Youth Agency.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't have any new information to share yet. Obviously, as soon as we do, then we will be sharing it. Yeah.
As soon as it comes out, we will be sharing it, but we are hopeful that after Easter, or maybe even during the Easter holidays, but hopefully by after Easter, it can resume face-to-face outdoors. And hopefully the weather will be nice. Well,
would be good, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
be very good. I think all young people are craving to be, well, most young people are craving to be with each other. So I think that'll be really great.
Yeah, we did an art session this evening, and it was looking at one of the parents and quite a lot of them are artists actually in our group. But she's also like a life coach. So she was looking at, you know, I was a bit concerned. I wanted to make sure that we were really on top of the kids, because she was asking them to look at things that made them unhappy and things they were looking forward to and stuff. And then, you know, they were expressing it through abstract art. So
did you get any budding abstract artists, would you say, coming out of the session?
Oh, we've got some brilliant artists. Yeah, some of the kids are really good.
That's great.
And it's really interesting how they differently, you know, can portray those things.
Yeah, it's definitely good to explore that, I think, in such a safe space like Woodcraft Folk as well, because maybe in other kind of social situations you might be a bit more guarded. But
yeah, definitely. I will run, if it feels a bit late. I think we did sort of very brief, right at the very beginning, we did online safety, and we put a lot of stuff in place so that they can't do sideways chatting. We very rarely use breakout rooms. We use them today, but that was because we had a lot of adults on who could manage them and manage the situation. But I will do them. I'll try and think of something that's a bit more fun, because this month has been about, although this session was not, it was fun actually, they really enjoyed it. But I've been trying to make this sort of last bit of the program all about having a bit of a laugh, really, because it's a bit shit.
Everybody needs it.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right then. Well,
okay, so
thank you so much for coming along, Susanna, and thanks Fiona for coming along, and thanks so much for Claire for leading the presentation, and it will be available over the next few days for others to watch back as well. So thanks so much everybody, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.